How can I make a sturdy designer wreath that will last for years?
Welcome friends, it's Gail here. Luba and I are excited to share with you our designer Pinecone Wreaths. While we really like this wreath, we're going to redo it because there's 5 issues with it. Number 1, there are so many pine cones on it, it makes it super heavy, so we went to lighten it. Number 2, we used pipe cleaners to add on our pine cones, and they started to unravel and to fall off, so we went to change that to wire. Number 3, we went to add more warmth by adding some cream color pine cones. Number 4, we went to add more contrast by adding some red pine cones. Number 5, the pine cones on the sides have been moving around quite a bit and falling to the back, and we want to make sure they're more secured on the front. We want our pinecone wreath to look professional and to last for many years to come. We collect and treat our pine cones by baking them first. We covered a baking sheet with wax paper, set the oven for 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and baked our pine cones for 30 minutes so we could get rid of bugs and any sap that might be left inside the pine cones. After you take them out and they cool off, they're ready for painting and flocking. When we use a 14-inch wire form for our pinecone wreaths, we spray paint on approximately 90 medium small to medium large pine cones. There are over 180 pine species. Our wreath is a mixture of Monterey, Jeffrey red, and Ponderosa pine cones. For our wreath, I'm painting 55 black, 13 white, and 21 red pine cones. My spray paints are more of a matte or flat finish. However, in the red, I could only find a satin finish. When spray painting pine cones, I like to spray the sides and the top, and then at the end I'll get the bottom. It takes 2 spray cans to paint the black, 1 can for the white and 1 can for the red, so it's a total of 4 spray cans. On all of our black pine cones, I'm stippling white acrylic paint on them. Using a toothbrush, I just dab on the sides, a little bit underneath, and then I like to get the top a little bit more there too. By the way, did you know that pine cones can reach up to 2 feet tall and can weigh over 11 pounds? I just find that super fascinating. The 2 trees that produce the largest pine cones are the sugar pine and the coulter pine. They can be found in the mountains in North America. As we were finishing up the step, a thief among us strikes. Well, at least she knows how to use a toothbrush. On the red and white pine cones, I'm sprinkling color flocking. The white is going to be more of a cream color, and the red is going to be a little bit darker, and I'm going to allow some of the paint to show through as well. For more information, click on more beneath this video to find the list of supplies and links. The self-adhesive flocking we're using is called Snow Flock, and it comes in a 2-pound bag. We use tempera powder to color our flocking. This makes it more non-permanent. In order to make it more permanent, it's important to spray it with water after applying the flocking powder so that it becomes more solidified. To make the flocking even more permanent, I always use at least 3 parts flocking to 1 part tempera powder. Red is one of the more challenging colors to make because it turns out more pink, especially when you're mixing red in with white. I like to use this Color of Love Ravishing Red color powder. To make red flock, I mix 3 parts white flock, 1 part red tempera powder, and then I double that 1 part with the Colors of Love Red. After shaking the colors together, it's ready for flocking. Flocking the pine cones is super easy. I set up my pine cones in a casserole dish, leaving a little space in between. Next, I spray water on top of the pine cones, pour my flocking into a strainer, and sprinkle the flocking on top of the pine cones, making sure I get the tops and the sides the best they can. Then I'll spray the pine cones once more with the water, so that way the adhesive in the flocking sticks to the pine cones. I can repeat this process, spritzing water and adding flocking till I get the desired effect. Let it dry for a good 2 hours. Then 2 hours later, I'll turn my pine cones over and flock the underneath side. Once they dry, they're ready to go. Here's a list of materials used thus far. 80 to 90 pine cones, 4 cans of spray paint, white craft paint, and a toothbrush, a baking dish and strainer, measuring cups, canisters and spoons for mixing flocking, colored tempera powders. I like to use black, blue, red, and yellow and mix my own colors. If mixing red, a bag of Colors of Love Ravishing Red powder, a bag of self-adhesive flocking, and a spray bottle with water. The next step is wrapping a wire around a 14-inch wreath form. To prepare my wreath for pine cones, I'm taking a 26 gauge wire and I'm wrapping it around. I'm going to wrap it around the vertical line there in the center, as well as one of the horizontal lines to anchor it. And then I'm just going to take the wire up and wrap it up and down. And I'm going to create a zigzag pattern. So there'll be 4 zigzags between each section. I will anchor each section by wrapping around the vertical line where it meets the inner circle line there. That part will be secured while the rest of the wire will move around a little bit. The reason why I'm doing this is when I'm adding pine cones, I don't want my pine cones to all fall to one side and be kind of awkward when I'm working on it. This will help keep the pine cones in place and make it easier to do section by section. Well, I bought my wire at Michael's. You can find it at the Dollar Tree as well. Finally, let's start wrapping those pine cones. Let's start with the outside and inside pine cones first, so that way we can build up a nice base. I organized my pine cones by saving my largest pine cones for the outer rim and my medium pine cones for the inner rim. All of the medium small to smaller pine cones are reserved for the center, including the red and white blocked pine cones. When wiring on the pine cones, I like to use these 16-inch long 22 gauge wires that I found on Amazon. They come in a package of 200. I'm beginning to wrap the wire around the lower scales, the bottom scales on the pine cone. Once I wrap it around, I want to make sure my ends are even, and then I want to twist the ends together at least 2 times. All of my pine cones will be attached to the 2 inner circles on the wire frame. The inside circle and the outer circle will not have any pine cones attached to them. I want the pine cones that I'm adding now to be able to rest on the inner and outer circles. This way, they'll be able to frame the other pine cones and help keep the weight distribution on the front side rather than allowing them to slide to the back side. I'm only working on the outside rim right now, and all of my pine cones for the outer rim are being attached to the 3rd ring from the center. I am twisting the wire on the back side tightly 3 times so I can lock the pine cone in place. Here's a quick look at adding the large pine cones on that 3rd rim all the way around. If I have larger pine cones, I look to space them out evenly so that it looks visually balanced throughout. Periodically, I'm using wire cutters to cut off the excess wire on the back side to free up space for the middle pine cones. When adding medium-sized pine cones to the innermost row, all of these pine cones are being added to the 2nd from the center rim. This leaves a gap between the 2nd and 3rd rims to add all the smaller pine cones in the middle. Here's a couple of tips and tricks when wiring the smaller red, white, and black pine cones in the middle gap. When I add the pine cones in the middle, I think about creating an underground tunnel or an underground archway. I want these pine cones to sit on top of the other pine cones so it looks like the ones underneath are small as well. And I'm going to be adding quite a few in there. This is where the 16-inch wire comes in handy. Unlike the 2 base rows that were tied tightly to the wire wreath frame, the wire ends on the pine cones in the middle will extend 1 to 2 inches from the wire wreath frame to the bottoms of the pine cones. I'm still twisting the wire around the pine cones 2 times. When I twist the wire ends around the wire wreath frame on the back side, I'm only going to twist it once and keep it very loose. The reason why is I want to fit as many pine cones in as I can on top, and then I'll turn it over and I'll start to tighten them in place later. This is when I'll pull the wires more tightly and twist them 3 times on the back side. The wires on the middle pine cones are still being twisted around the 2nd and 3rd rims on the wire wreath frame. This gets a little bit tricky and it's more time consuming, however the results are beautiful. Just keep adding pine cones upon pine cones. You can do 1 section at a time, 2 sections at a time. or wait till the end to tighten the pine cones on the back side, wearing gloves would come in handy to protect your hands here. And here's the finished project. What an accomplishment, and doesn't it look gorgeous? Let's review our checklist and see if we problem solved the issues we had with the first wreath. Did we use less pine cones to make the wreath lighter? Yes, we created a hollow space by placing the middle pine cones on top of the base pine cones. Are the wire pieces holding the pine cones in place and not unraveling like the pipe cleaners? Check. The wires are thinner, so it's easier to twist them tighter, and they're longer than the pipe cleaners. Did the cream color pine cones add a little warmth to the wreath? Yes. Did we add contrast by adding red pine cones? You bet. Are the pine cones secured and positioned on the front of the wreath? Ding dong. The pine cones are resting on the fourth and first rims, since they're attached to the second and third rims only. The remaining supplies for this section include a 14-inch wire wreath frame, a roll of 26-gauge wire, buy at the Dollar Tree, 90 16-inch 22-gauge wires from Amazon, wire cutters, gloves, and coated picture framing wire. Lastly, I'll tie on a little bit of picture framing wire on the back side to create a hanger so I can hang it up. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and think about subscribing. Here's more videos that you may be interested in.